Now, this video is not going to be looking at what countries are most likely to leave. It's not looking at opinion polls, not looking at, how strong the Eurosceptic parties are in those countries. It's not saying any of those things. In this video, we're just going to be looking at the pure facts in terms of economics. We're going to have money talking today because money talks. So that's what we're going to be looking at. There'll be 4 different categories. So one is going to be trade. The other one is going to be whether the countries are net contributors to the EU budget. Third one is going to be who were net recipients and who were net donors of the Corona Recovery Fund from this year. And the fourth one is going to be which countries are part of the Eurozone. With this, we're going to look through some of the countries. So going category by category, we're going to look first of all at trade. Now, the UK was in a quite unique position within the EU in that it hit it didn't hit the third one because obviously Corona wasn't about at that point. But it hits the other criteria. So Britain was not in the euro. It was for every single year that it had been a member, it was a net contributor to the EU budget. And on top of that, especially in the later years of our relationship, it was a thing where we did most of our trade with countries outside of the EU. Now that we're leaving, this changes the dynamic in Europe quite considerably. The stats that I'm going to read you now with regard to trade are with Britain leaving already been factored in. So this is the percentage of trade that countries do outside of the bloc in the absence of the UK. So our closest neighbour, the Republic of Ireland, comes in at number 1 with regard to this category. Its largest trading partner is the United States. Taken as a single country is the United States. When we add Britain, which also a major trading partner, so Britain and America and all the other countries in the world outside the EU, there's now 27 countries in the EU, there's about 200 countries in the world. So looking at just those figures, 63% of Ireland's trade, this is the total sum of the imports and exports combined, 63% of trade will be done with countries outside of the EU. Big part of why countries joined the EU is to have tariff-free exchange of goods and services and stuff within the common market. This allows people from Britain and from other places in the EU to trade without tariffs. So tariffs are taxes on imports. So if I sell something to someone in Germany, the German government's not going to put a tax on that because it's still within the EU. However, obviously when we leave, Germany could have tariffs on our goods and we could also put tariffs on their goods, vice versa. Free trade does tend to be better overall, but still, countries for various different reasons will employ protectionist policies, either to protect their own business or just to give a little bit of clout on at the bargaining table as such. 63% of Ireland's trade will be done with countries outside the EU, and therefore if we're going to make the argument on trade alone, once we've left, Ireland is in the strongest position to leave the bloc and then strike up trade deals with countries, the other 63% of its trade. Now, the EU obviously does do a lot of trade with countries outside of the bloc as well. It has many different trade agreements, so it does cover quite an extent of that. However, the EU does not have countries with quite a lot of places, with America, with China, etc, etc. It's not to say that Ireland, if it were to leave, would end up doing this for various different reasons, to do with food standards and environmental standards, etc, etc, workers' rights. There's a whole heap of things that go into trade deals which are a lot more to do with politics than they are to do with basic economics. So Ireland is top place with that. Now we look at second place and we see that Cyprus. Cyprus being on periphery, it's quite simple to see with what the stats I'm going to be discussing here. It tends to be the countries which are more on the periphery of the continent that tend to have most trade with places outside, although not exclusively, but by and large. Cyprus comes in at 59%, and obviously quite a lot of its trade is done with places like Turkey, other places in the Middle East, etc, etc. Quite a lot of its trade is not necessarily done through the EU. So again, Cyprus, which joined relatively late in the game, if it wanted to, on those grounds, we're not going to talk about anything else right this second, on trading grounds, it makes most sense for Cyprus to leave. Now we're starting to get further and further down the list. So at 49%, we have the nation of Italy. Italy being one of the founding members of the EU, it's one of the original founding 6. The Treaty of Rome, the founding document which founded the EU, was obviously in the Italian capital. Now one would expect Italy to be very tied up within the project. However, 49% of its trade after Brexit will actually be with countries outside the EU. So that means that 51% will be with countries inside of the remaining EU. However, it's something to bear in mind that actually a substantial chunk of its trade is still going to be done with countries outside of it. Next, we're going to go on to France. France comes in at 48%. France is one of the founding members. It's pretty much the same thing that you could say with Italy, except that France, especially in the early days of the Union, this is before Germany reunified. Up until that point, France was the kind of dominant power. France was the one that had to kind of be like dealt with and stuff, yeah. And what France wanted is pretty much what the bloc ended up wanting, because France held quite a lot of sway. If you look at especially to do with the common agricultural policy, the common fishery policy, etc., quite a lot of the very most protectionist like kind of elements of the bloc, and in many ways some of the most like federalist minded tend to come from France. Actually, one of the founding fathers like of the European project as such, he was a Frenchman. France has a lot of ties with the EU, so it's unlikely to, but at the same time, if it wanted to, there's still 48% of its trade which will be done with countries outside the EU. Now we're starting to get onto a whole bunch of countries which are at 47%. So we have Denmark, Greece, Sweden, and we have the most powerful country in the EU, Germany. Germany is right at the heart of the EU. It's the seat of the Eurobank. It's the biggest net contributor by far. Even when Britain was in it, Britain came second place to Germany. Germany funds a lot of the project, and it does certainly serve Germany's national interest in many regards to have United States of Europe, because if one looks at it, Germany obviously geographically speaking right in the heart of the continent, and it's been the plan for like many German foreign policy thinkers to have a kind of unified Europe with Germany at the centre of it pretty much for the last 100 years. Obviously in various different forms and with very, very different intentions from what it was before, but still each country has its own geopolitical interests, and so that's something to take in consideration. That while the German economy is very, very powerful, and while it trades a lot with countries outside the bloc in its own right, it still is a thing where it is very tied to the EU. So it could leave if it wanted to, and we'll get on to a bit more of that in a bit, but it's just something to bear in mind. Now we're starting to get on some of the other countries. So we have Malta at 46%, and we have Finland and Lithuania at 45%. These countries again tend to be quite peripheral. These countries joined like relatively late in the game, not necessarily a big Eurosceptic presence within these countries. In the case of Malta, they do receive quite a lot from the EU budget, which we'll get onto in a bit, but it is something to bear in mind that actually again quite a substantial part of their trade done with it. Now when we look at some of the other countries, ones that make a lot of the headlines with regard to being very hostile to the EU in many regards, going against some of their foreign policy, their courts like kind of like coming up to loggerhead with the EU because of laws being applied domestically that the EU is kind of, some would say, interfering with. Quite controversial laws that have kind of been passed in places like Poland and Hungary. But on this list, with regard to these kind of statistics, we have Poland with 26% of its trade done with countries outside the EU, and Hungary, which is 21%. So 79% of Hungary's trade is done with countries inside the EU, and 74% of Poland's is done with countries inside the EU, and this is after Britain's really left, so never mind what it was when we were still members. When we actually think about it, it's a thing where these countries, as much as they might complain, at the end of the day, a significant amount of their trade is done with countries inside the bloc, and so from a trading standpoint, it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense for them to leave. Assuming they were able to strike up free trade deals afterwards, maybe, but if the EU didn't give them a free trade deal, it would like quite significantly harm their economy. And then also we have countries which again have been in the news a lot this year, Holland and Austria. Holland, Austria, Sweden and Denmark. These countries have been part of what's known as the Frugal Four in Europe. There are pushes for some level of Euroscepticism within these countries. However, when we look at Austria and Holland, 35% of Holland's trade is done with countries outside the EU, and for Austria, it's 33%. Holland and Austria are very, very dependent. Austria joined in 1995. Holland is one of the founding members, and as much as in both regards there might be politically strong Eurosceptic strain, at the end of the day, it's still a situation where in trading terms they don't have as much clout as they might pretend that they do.